Welcome to Insight Marketing Success, the podcast where marketing knowledge meets real-world experience, from vision to execution.
Welcome to IMS. Today we have Garlynn Woodsong, who's managing director, but let's ask him who he is and what he does. Go ahead, Garlynn.
Thanks, Ricardo. I'm Garlynn Woodsong. I'm a urban planner and systems thinker who has spent more than 3 decades working at the intersection of cities, infrastructure, housing, and climate. My work focuses on how communities actually implement change, not just how they plan for it. So I currently lead Woodsong Associates. We're a planning and development consultancy. But I also serve as executive director of Place Initiative. We're a national nonprofit focused on advancing walkable, low carbon, equitable communities. I wear a lot of hats. I'm also the chair of the Oregon Cooperative Housing Network, where we are working to expand cooperative housing as a pathway to shared ownership and long-term housing stability. And over the course of my career, I've worked on regional planning, on climate action planning, scenario planning, housing policy, development feasibility, actual real estate development. What ties all of that together is a simple idea. Planning only matters if it actually leads to better outcomes for real people in the real world.
Okay. That's a handful. So tell us about your journey. I'm pretty sure, you are doing all kinds of stuff, but tell us about when you graduated. What did you graduate on, and how did you get to where you are? Very interesting to me. But tell us about the journey that you followed.
Sure. Yeah, my academic background is in geography and urban planning. I studied at Simon's Rock College of Bard, Great Barrington, Massachusetts on the East Coast, and Portland State University in Portland, Oregon on the West Coast. My career path has not been linear, which I think actually helped me. I started with geographic information systems, or GIS, and regional planning work, including at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the San Francisco Bay Area. And later I worked at Calthrop Associates, which was at the time the world's leading regional planning firm, on large regional scenario planning efforts. At one point, I stepped away from traditional planning work and went into real estate development, which gave me a much deeper understanding of the financial and regulatory realities behind building housing. When I returned to planning, I brought that implementation perspective with me. So my work today tries to connect policy and planning and real-world delivery, because a good plan should not just describe a future, it should make that future possible.
Wow, amazing. So in your opinion, what's broken about the way we currently plan and build cities?
There's a lot of things, Ricardo. It's almost like, where do we start? After World War II, there were some dark forces behind the scene doing some things that you and I would not agree with. There is a court decision in the 1920s that basically said, look, you can't just segregate cities. You can't say this is a black neighborhood and that's a white neighborhood. That's unconstitutional. So planners, in all their wisdom, combined with some other folks that wanted to push racial segregation, they said, okay, fine. We're not going to say this is a black neighborhood and that's a white neighborhood. What we're going to say is this neighborhood allows multifamily housing, but that neighborhood only allows single family housing. And what that's going to do is it's going to create economic segregation. You're not going to be able to afford to buy the homes in the single family neighborhood unless you're wealthy. And then we're also going to do some other things, like using the GI Bill to limit the purchase of homes to white people, that makes sure that you can only be wealthy if you're white. And then you'll only be able to buy into a white neighborhood because it will still be a white neighborhood. We just won't call it a white neighborhood. We'll call it a single family neighborhood. So this was something that was hinted about, and I would feel a lot less confident saying those words prior to 2016. But in 2016, a book was published called The Color of Law, which brought the receipts and showed that this actually happened. This was actually the intent, that single family zoning was actually enacted nationwide with a intent to deliver racial segregation. Once that book was published and it showed those receipts, it's like the mask came off.
Whoa.
And so, yeah, right. And so this past decade, since 2016, has really been a really tough decade for the planning industry to come to terms with that, or try to come to terms with that. I'm also a licensed realtor. I own a real estate brokerage in Oregon, Form of Realty. And so I receive, or for a period of time, I was receiving 2 magazines every month, Planning Magazine and Realtor Magazine, right? So Realtor Magazine, they publish an apology. They said, we, realtors, are sorry for the role that we played in furthering racial segregation in this country. It was wrong, and we're going to work to undo it. like mea culpa. Planning magazine has never yet published an apology for the role of the planning industry. And so I had the opportunity to ask a commissioner of the American Planning Association, Mitch Silver, who happens to be a Black gentleman. So I felt comfortable asking him about racial politics because I know him and I know he's comfortable talking about it. And I asked him, Mitch, realtors apologize. Why didn't planners apologize? He said, well, Garlynn, the planning community is very afraid of alienating our more conservative base. And they're not supportive of apologizing for this or admitting that single family zoning is wrong because they don't feel like their constituents are ready to reform it. And so we're not ready to apologize yet. And I said, wow, don't you think that's wrong?
Well, like you said earlier before, there are some powers behind everything, right? And so
Yeah.
they don't want to lose their base. So, okay, understand what's behind, but obviously it is what it is. Well, let me ask
Yeah.
you this. Why are limited equity cooperative housing and community ownership models becoming more relevant today?
So yeah, let's unpack that. So a housing cooperative is when a group of people come together and they form corporation to buy a building, and then they each own a share in that corporation, and owning that share entitles them to a home in the building, like an apartment, right? So
Okay.
just like a condo, except that in a condominium you have like a three-dimensional space that is recorded to the county recorder's office. It's bought and sold in the open market, just like the title to a fee simple single family home. In a cooperative, the co-op itself handles those transactions. It's just a single building that's recorded down at the county recorder. And so what that means is that the co-op actually has a lot more flexibility than a condominium, including for resident control. A limited equity co-op pairs that cooperative structure with a community land trust that owns the land and leases the building to the co-op under like a 99-year renewable lease. And what that means, and this is based on long experience in New York City and other places, with co-ops kind of forming with good intentions, and then the market rises, and then the co-op members are like, oh wow, you mean if we all sold we could become millionaires? Let's sell. And then like they all become millionaires, that's great for them, but now that building's expensive and no one else is ever going to be able to afford to live in it again who's a normal folks. It's only millionaires, right? Unlimited equity co-op says, wait, hold up. The whole point of the co-op was to make things better for people's lives, not just the first generation of people, but like forever. So let's make this permanently affordable, and we'll limit your resale upside. Like if you make 80% of the regional income when you bought it and then you sold it, you can keep all the equity that you essentially bought down. Like if you bought it for 300,000 and you took out a mortgage for, some portion of that, and then you paid off the mortgage, like you'll keep your 300,000. Like you just made $300,000. But if it went up to $1 million, you don't get to sell it for $1 million when you bought for 300,000. You get to sell it for maybe a sales price that whatever year it is, someone who's making 80% of the median income in your region could afford to purchase it for that sales price when they buy, because you want the next guy to also be a regular guy and have access to this housing. So unlimited equity co-op, you can start to see how it could be an amazing tool to stabilize neighborhoods, to prevent and to allow for communities for families to stay whole. So that's the power of limited equity co-ops, is that ability to stabilize neighborhoods, and that's why Oregon Cooperative Housing Network, Place Initiative, Woodsong Associates, across Form of Realty, wherever I'm working, we're now pushing limited equity co-ops because we see it as a solution to the housing crisis, and frankly, one that doesn't get enough traction, especially on the West Coast. Most people don't know what a co-op is, much less a limited equity co-op. And so just telling people about this solution can be huge and opening minds to these ideas.
Okay. Obviously, you have a lot of knowledge on building communities and building and probably selling and so forth. But you at some point had to brand yourself and had to sell your services. How do you brand yourselves? What has been successful for you?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. And because in the planning world, marketing is really about building trust and helping people understand complex ideas. And so in the planning world and in the nonprofit world, we're engaged in public communications, such as to help large public agencies communicate the implications of regional growth scenarios, right? So these projects would involve translating massive data sets about housing, transportation, climate emissions, and data use into something decision makers and communities can understand. The challenge is not the data, it's the story. That approach, if it's visualization and narrative, it works. Instead of saying this policy reduces vehicle mile traveled by 8%, you show people what the community might look like if housing, transit, and jobs are organized differently. So once people can picture the future, the conversation changes. So I'm pretty good at that. Storytelling is a part of the project. But when it comes to the sort of marketing that grows the business, not just helps the client achieve their goals. That's where I would love to understand more about what we can do in our industries, because often we're reactive. Often we're looking for the next RFP or we're looking for the next grant opportunity for the nonprofit to apply for. And we're not getting out in front and setting the narrative, establishing the storyline in the public, and then waiting for the phone to call, although that's a great model if you can get there.
Yeah, yes, I understand. All right. Well, in the process of trying to get more projects and more RFPs, I assume you have invested into marketing. Tell me of a situation where you invested this much, expected this much, even more, and you received this much. Would you learn something?
Yeah, we don't invest heavily in marketing. I would say that in the nonprofit realm, we do the most, because as a nonprofit, we feel that part of our job is communication. We sit on top of a mountain of knowledge, and we really want to share that knowledge with the public, but we have to do so in bite-sized chunks. And so, we try to step up our social media game and deliver public information that people can digest and consume. And so that is a part of the effort. But it is expensive. It's expensive to invest in a social media budget, to hire social media personnel to run those plays. It takes a lot of time to develop a successful social media game and implement it. And then, the payback, there may not be a payback that we can measure. The payback is clicks or engagement, but not money in the bank necessarily, right? And so that's I think where we struggle, is how do we convert clicks and likes into future opportunities to get on the ground and to have paid professionals, delivering better outcomes in the real world. That's kind of the gap and the disconnect that I'm constantly seeing and constantly struggling with.
Okay. Well, let's talk about first then about who's the ideal client for you. And I know you're a consultancy company and you have different silos. But so give me the most profitable ideal client for you.
Our work tends to support cities, regional planning organizations, nonprofits, and public agencies that are trying to solve complex problems around housing, land use, transportation, and climate. We also work with institutions that are trying to bridge planning and implementation. That could include philanthropic organizations, community development groups, or public agencies looking for new strategies. So in general, we're more useful when an organization is trying to move from analysis to action. An ideal client is, super ideal would be a foundation or a philanthropist who just cuts us a check and says, go forth and do good in the world and give us a report in a year, letting us know what you did. And if we like it, we'll give you more. And that's in a lot of industries, you might think that's fantasy. But if you're in the nonprofit world with a mission, that's reality. That's actually, we have been funded by a funder who had some flavor of that conversation with us. That's very different from consulting, and it's very, very hard to get. It's a relationship driven
Yep, but it's obviously they do it for a reason. You appeal to their life purpose or what they matters to them. And so I understand it though. I understand that. Well, let's talk about the person. Let's imagine that you go to a restaurant and that you go in one of those booths where you cannot see in front or behind you, but you hear familiar voices and it's your three best friends talking about you. What would be the three things you would like them to hear? You would like them to say about you?
I would hope they would say that I try to bring people together around meaningful problems and that I work hard to translate big ideas into things that can actually happen. I would also hope they would say that I care deeply about communities and about creating places where people can thrive, not just economically, but socially and culturally as well. at the end of the day, cities are about people. If our work helps strengthen communities and relationships, that's success. And hopefully my friends would know that, would understand that about me. That's what I push for.
Awesome. Well, you and I both know that, life is good, but sometimes there are things in either personal or professional life that can bring you down. How do you ground yourself? How do you get out of thinking the world is going to end or that, it's very hard? What do you do?
Yeah, especially now with the war and everything, that question is very, very relevant to all of us in our day-to-day life. I focus on my breath, on being in the here and now, on the birds and the trees outside the window, on the real world. Problems often feel overwhelming until they are put in context. Once contextualized properly, they can be dealt with. A lot of the work I do deals with large systems and long time horizons, climate, infrastructure, housing systems. It helps to remember that progress happens step by step, project by project, conversation by conversation, and that this is about people. And sometimes the solution to staying grounded is to get away, to get out of the office, go find some people, go have some real conversations with real humans in the real world, and maybe go listen to some music and dance because we need to exercise. If we're all in our heads, that's when we get depressed or anxious. It's like we need to get out of our heads, into our bodies, into reality.
With you. All right. So you obviously have ample knowledge today about geography, city, um, real estate selling and buying and whatever that is. But when you first graduated and you felt the world was your oyster, and if you were able to give yourself a piece of advice, whisper in your ear, what would you tell yourself at the time of graduation?
Yeah, I would go back a little bit earlier to when I was in college.
Okay.
And I would say this: you are not here just to get good grades or complete assignments. You are here to build relationships, meet people, form alliances, find your collaborators. The networks you build and the people you learn with often shape your life far more than any single class or credential. The knowledge matters, of course, but the community you build around that knowledge matters even more.
Amazing. Beautiful. All right, last question for you. What do you want your legacy to be?
Yeah, I think I want my legacy to be many-fold, which makes it harder. I want a built legacy. I believe that people are happiest when we live in community. And I believe that cluster housing is kind of the best form of housing because it places people's homes around a central semi-private courtyard where you can open up the door and let the kids come out and play, and the parents can watch from the windows. The elders can be there, the kids can be there. That's the essence of community. That's the closest thing we can get to the ancestral village, right? Is to make these kind of micro villages. And you can place that in the country, you could place that in the city, you could place that in a suburb. It could work anywhere. You're talking about the scale of the buildings around the courtyard in those different contexts. I would love to deliver cooperatively held, limited equity cooperatively held courtyard communities, little villages. That would be amazing if I could deliver that built legacy. But also, I want to make sure that people are happy and that our culture continues because we're slowly losing our culture. It's being attacked from a thousand different directions, and it's very important. We are social creatures as humans, and we need culture. Culture defines us and gives us meaning and purpose. And so, I also want to make sure that we have cultural cooperatives that allow people to choose careers as cultural workers, whether it's artists or musicians or fashion designers or models or any of those things where capitalism devalues it and says, yeah, that's, we're going to pay you a lot of money if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, but if you want to be a painter, good luck. You're probably going to be begging. Like I don't think it has to be that way. Actually, I believe that the highest and best use of civilization is to produce art. And that art and music is what endures over the centuries. Like in 200 years, no one's going to give a crap what your quarterly report said,
Yeah.
but they are going to remember the song or the art piece. Like that's what endures. That's what we look back on. We remember other civilizations and eras for their art, for their music, right? And so that's actually the highest and best use of all human talent is support and develop the arts, right? It's just the capitalism devalues that. And so I believe that also through the cooperative framework, we can deliver tools to support artists and allow artists to kind of choose art as a career within a framework that maybe decommodifies it
Awesome.
and provides support from another angle.
Garlynn, it has been a pleasure meeting you and learning more about you and what you do. I look forward to collaborating with you and perhaps working together.
Absolutely. Pleasure talking with you as well, Ricardo. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Insight Marketing Success, where marketing knowledge meets real-world experience from vision to execution.